Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage, and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs, and the Lord holds them in derision. He will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord has said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath will quickly be kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. The gospel is all over Psalm 2. The gospel is the good news that essentially Jesus wins, and the one with all power and all authority has our best interest in mind as his children. And he's going to bring victory about even over the kings of the earth who have power and sometimes can get kind of drunk on that power. They think they have all authority when really they have borrowed authority. And the point here in Psalm 2 is at some point the rightful king is going to take that authority back. This lays out the chain of in what we call investiture. Who gives power to whom? And we see God the Father, the Lord, Yahweh here, gives power to the Son, to his anointed. Anointed is, if you were to use the Hebrew word for that, that would be Mashiach, or where we get Messiah. And so we know that this anointed is an inheritor from the Father because he asks for the nations, and he gets the inheritance of the nations from the Father. We know that he's described as the Son, which in the English versions is capitalized because we know we're talking about Jesus, God the Son of God. And so the gospel is simply that everything that Jesus said is going to come to pass, it will, and he's going to win. And we've seen the end of the book now. And so God is nice enough to warn us, and he warns the kings. He says, listen, kings, you think that you're in charge of some stuff, but you're only in charge of little stuff, little kingdoms and times in history and so on. The right thing to do would be to take that authority that has been loaned to you by God, submit it back to God and say, what do you want me to do with this? If you set yourself up against God and make yourself his enemy, then it's not going to end well for you. Because anybody who can lay down his life and then take it up again because he feels like it, that guy's in charge. If you are in charge of life as an entity, as a thing, as a noun, then you are also in charge by extension of everything that is contained within that life. If you're in charge of the basket, you're in charge of the fruit within it. And Jesus demonstrated by raising from the dead that he was in charge. That's a pretty solid claim to have authority over life and death when you just beat it. Like at its own game, you submit to the death process and then say, this doesn't apply to me, and you just get up. And then after he got up, he said in Matthew 28, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. So Jesus is king, and the gospel is true, and he has beaten sin, he has beaten death, and he will bring all of the nations under his command. We're not currently there yet, but he's actually included us in his plans. Let me read you one more passage that describes this, not in poetry as Psalms does, but in a prophetic vision from the prophet Daniel. This is Daniel 7, and I'm going to read you verses 9 and 10, and then 13 and 14. In Daniel 7, verse 9, we're going to see somebody here named the Ancient of Days, who is God the Father. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him, and 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. All right, then some enemies get defeated. Then we see verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, God the Father, and was presented before him. So we've got God the Father sitting on his throne, and then he's called the Ancient of Days. And then Jesus, the Son of Man, shows up riding on the clouds, which I think is pretty boss. 14, and to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed. So the gospel is that the work of Christ, it worked. He beat death. He beat the sin that leads to death, and he's going to rule forever and ever and ever. And you and I get invited into that king and subject relationship, which is good when you've got a good master. And we get to start that now rather than at the day of judgment when everybody else is going to be forced into it. He's a king. He's not a teddy bear. You know, he's loving and he's kind. He's also in charge and he's a judge. And so the gospel is that Jesus wins.